Welcome to today's webinar, everyone. We are delighted to have Majority Leader Hoyer with us today. I will kick it over to our CEO, JB Holston, to kick off the conversation.
Thanks very much, Jenna. And I do want to get to questions right away, Majority Leader Hoyer. But first and foremost, thank you and congratulations on passing this historic law.
Well, the infrastructure law is the one you're talking about. We've also
Correct.
did the rescue plan, and we have Build Back Better. They're the package of the president's vision of how not only we responded, of course, last year with millions of dollars, almost some $5 trillion to the pandemic and the impact it had on the health of our people and, of course, on the economics of our country, the growth, the ability to create and keep employees at work, extraordinary investment, which worked. We didn't go into a recession. A lot of people had very hard times. A lot of businesses had very hard times. But for what we did in 2020, we would have gone into a deep recession, maybe a depression. We didn't do that. And the president, after he was elected, has set forth a vision for building back better. In other words, we've gone through this crisis. We've been obviously hit hard by this pandemic. We continue to be hit hard by this pandemic. And the first thing he wanted to do was have a rescue plan, which came in and tried to lift people up and try to get them out of the hole into which they had been pressed. And then secondly, he worked with Republicans and Democrats to get an infrastructure. Frankly, we invested in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which was a $787 billion bill, which we thought was a very large bill, which now looks like, oh, gee, that was just chump change. That was an extraordinary amount of money. As a matter of fact, I did an event yesterday at IRS in New Carrollton of money that was being spent from the era of 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and is saving us about $2.5 million in some energy upgrades. But in the infrastructure bill, we had met with President Trump some 2 years ago. And in the course of that meeting, we suggested, look, we need to put $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion into infrastructure. The president's response was, that's too little. We need to do $2 trillion. That was President Trump. Now, unfortunately, he never sent down a bill to accomplish that objective. President Biden had more money, about that same amount, a little less than that amount in mind, and ultimately working with Republicans and Democrats came up with the $1.2 trillion. Frankly, one of the biggest investments in infrastructure that any country has ever made. And it had very broad support. The business community, as you well know, JB, was very much for this bill. The partnership was for this bill. And by the way, let me congratulate you on the leadership of the partnership, but also on the work that the partnership is doing to make sure that our region, which is an extraordinarily vibrant, vital region, not only because it's the center of our government, but also it has become the center of so much business and economic development and research and development. So it's a really exciting region for us to live in and to invest in. And so that's what this infrastructure bill is all about. And as amazing sums of money. DC is going to get a little over $3 billion. Virginia, a little over $10 billion, and Maryland, a little over $7 billion. So that's $20 billion being invested through this act in infrastructure in the Washington metropolitan region. So it's going to make a real, as the president says, transformational, generational difference.
Let's talk a little bit about that 20 billion, if we might, Majority Leader. You've been an advocate for the region, of course, for a very long time, successfully. That is a very large amount of money. What guidance would you give to the new governor, the current governor of Maryland, the mayors, as they think about how to prioritize spending and how to respond to the $20 billion opportunity?
JB, my advice is the same as the president's advice and the president's premise behind this infrastructure bill and also Build Back Better. And it is that we apply this money so that it doesn't just have temporary impact. that it has generational impact, long-term infrastructure that will make us more competitive, more user-friendly, more available to our people, which they'll need. Broadband being a specific example. If you don't have broadband, you're essentially in today's world shut out of avenues for opportunity and success and progress. So my advice would be for the governors, very frankly, for county executives, for county commissioners, for local officials, for mayors, municipalities, in the series of bills, all of these entities have gotten substantial sums of money to either help meet COVID or to invest in infrastructure that we need to be competitive in the 21st century. And my advice is use that money wisely. Yes, it is found money to the extent that you didn't anticipate it, you didn't think it was coming, you didn't plan for it. Take the time to focus, to plan, and don't use this for just nitpicking projects or operational issues. Invest this for the long term. Let's make a generational difference at the federal, state, and local level.
You mentioned broadband. Rail is another category of very significant investment in the bill. Yeah, talk a little bit about why rail is so important, why it was so important for the law.
Well, rail, of course, is very important for a number of reasons. Number one, it's important for commerce. Number two, it's important for travel for people to get from one place to another, either job to job or family to family or event to event. And rail is also very important from the perspective of climate, because the more efficient we make our rail systems, the more energy friendly we make our rail system and non-carbon producing and moving large numbers of people. One of the efforts in all of these bills, when I say all of the bills, the Build Back Better and infrastructure in particular, not so much the rescue plan, although there was money in there, is to meet the challenge of the climate crisis. We have seen some 31, I think was the figure, major climate incidents in the past year in our region, which have threatened our region. And that is because of climate change. So we have a real responsibility in every area to look at the consequence that will have on the environment, the consequences will have on global warming. And one of the rail investments that we're making, hopefully, is going to have a big impact, not only because we will reduce automobile traffic, which is one of the largest contributors to global warming in the world, but also can contribute to cleaner energy use and less pollution. Yeah. So this is the largest, I think, investment in rail that we've seen in many, many, many years. I'm looking for the figure. Of course, as you know, we also did the $150 million investment that has been ongoing. And of course, I talked to Senator Toomey, I talked to Senator Warner, I talked to other senators, Senator Cardin, Senator Van Hollen, about making sure that $150 million on an ongoing investment was in fact in the infrastructure bill that the president and the Republican and Democratic senators who negotiated that would get. I'm looking now, this bill provides $66 billion in the nation's railroads and $22 billion in our region in the Northeast Corridor for Amtrak. And that is an extraordinary amount of money. The federal government is enhancing the local and state investment, which is really going to make an economic difference for us in terms of commercial, but it's also going to make a personal. And as I say, the convergent benefit is we're going to also have cleaner environment.
Right, and there clearly are investments in electric vehicle infrastructure as part of this as well. You mentioned the $150 million reauthorization for WMATA, and we know you were vital to ensuring that happened. As you think about,
I've been here long enough, JB, that I've been doing WMATA for my whole career, which has started in '81. And talking about bipartisanship, Frank Wolf and I. Frank Wolf, you recall, a Republican from Virginia who's retired, But Frank Wolf and I essentially for about 8 years were joined at the hip, literally, in making sure that we got the money to complete WMATA and then got the money to support WMATA. And so it seems that we're doing things every year for WMATA, because WMATA also has a tremendous impact on the traffic flow from Virginia into DC, from Maryland into DC, and around DC. And again, that's dealing with the climate and trying to get automobiles, which are still one of the most polluting devices we have. And as you point out, we put billions of dollars into the national, $63 million into Maryland alone. And I'm looking at I think I probably have the Virginia and DC, but into the charging stations, so that people will have the confidence that if they buy an electric car and we produce electricity in a clean way through alternative energy sources as we move along, that we will have a tremendous impact on global warming. But also, these electric cars are so darned efficient, and boy, are they fast. I remember that I was out at SpaceX like 15 years ago, and the founder of SpaceX said, "Do you want to take a ride in my car?" This was after I went through, and it looked like a surgical room, what developing these rockets. And I said, "Sure." And so we got in that car, and I really hadn't experienced an electric car. Came out of SpaceX driveway, went about 100 yards, and turned onto a 6-lane divided boulevard with no cars on it. He said, and I had a security detail that I was riding with, and they were following us. He said, "Do you think they'll mind if I show you what it can do?" And he pressed on the accelerator in that electric car, which was his Tesla, and pushed me back into the seat. I was amazed at how efficient they are. But what they really are is they're really making a contribution to making sure that global warming does not overwhelm us in the decades ahead.
If we talk about,
by the way, let me just for the listeners, Virginia for electric vehicles and charging stations, Virginia's getting 106 million, DC 17 million, and Maryland, I mentioned that figure, 63 million, or $186 million for our region to make sure that somebody can go out and buy an electric car and be sure that they have a charging station that conveniently near. Although the good news is electric vehicles are now up into the 300-mile range. So it's amazing.
Right. It's been interesting too to see the North American manufacturers really lean heavily in on electric vehicle manufacturing and really stake out a position.
They know it's the future.
Yeah. That's right. Inclusion, equity, diversity, those are central, of course, to this administration's agenda, central to a lot of the effort around infrastructure as well. You mentioned generational change. When you think about ways to spend some of this infrastructure money with inclusion as a fundamental goal, what are some of the kinds of projects that we should be thinking about that could meet that aim?
One of the critical things, of course, is public transportation. You know, you and I both own automobiles. I don't know what you have, but I drive around in a. Well, first of all, I have a security detail, so I drive around in a Chevrolet Suburban. It's a great car, but my personal car is a 2003 Chrysler 300. It's 18 years old. It's in perfect shape, so I don't need a new one at this point in time, although it's not as energy efficient as a newer one's going to be. And maybe when I retire, I'll get a newer one. But in any event, my point is you and I can get in the car and go where we want. But there are literally hundreds of thousands of people, maybe well over 1 million in the Washington metropolitan region that don't have a car and can't get to work easily, can't get to their kids' school easily or to the doctor. And we need to have a public transportation system, and we need to be sensitive to the creating of a public transportation system that serves those who most need it. Now, it'll serve all the rest of us as well, but we need to be targeted. And whether you're a governor or a county executive in a large county like Prince George County, we need to be focused on making sure that people have access so that they can be more successful in their lives because they can get from point A to point B relatively cheaply, relatively quickly, and at a relatively precise time. Not exactly precise like your car. You get in and you get there and that's it. But I think that's one of the things that we hope will happen.
Yeah. Clearly, there's a lot of momentum around buses as an opportunity to address the issue that you were just mentioning, Majority Leader Hoyer. Clean buses, clean energy around buses as another opportunity as well. And it certainly seems, and then there are also a lot of conversations about free fare as a way to try to make sure that transit is accessible to those who need it most. And some exciting initiatives I know underway in Richmond and elsewhere.
I think in Alexandria, they have a sort of a commuter bus in the business area, which is free. You hop on it and you want to go 5 or 6 or 10, 12 blocks to get to the other store that you want to get a product at. That's it's in use now, and I think this will enable people to perhaps have more alternatives like that available to people.
Yeah. You mentioned climate. That is central to the infrastructure bill, but obviously it's a centerpiece too of the Build Back Better bill that's pending. Talk to the listeners a little bit again about why that's so central. Obviously, we just had the COP in Scotland, et cetera, but I think it's a useful time to reiterate for everyone why it's central to economic growth.
JB, I couldn't agree with you more. I think you're absolutely right. I was scheduled to go to COP. Unfortunately, in passing Build Back Better, we went a couple of days longer in session, so I didn't get there. The speaker got there a little later in the week. But global warming, the Department of Defense says, is one of, if not our biggest existential threat. And that's amazing when you think of China competition and you think of Russia, nuclear weapons, all that. The Department of Defense believes that climate change is one of our greatest existential threats. Now, given that, in the Build Back Better bill, now there's obviously money in the infrastructure bill, but in the Build Back bill, there is over $500 billion, $500 billion, the largest investment that's ever been made in the history of the world in trying to deal with climate. Obviously, we have a number of objectives: 2030, 2050, to get to zero in terms of net carbon neutrality. We need to do that, and that's why we made such a large investment. It encourages, it incentivizes the private sector, incentivizes the public sector. The Department of Defense is one of the biggest users of energy, obviously, and they're very focused on this. The airline industry, I was talking to leaders of the airline industry. Obviously, they have a real challenge in terms of using fuel that will power our air traffic, commercial and otherwise, so that the president, who has rejoined Paris and recommitted America, which is, of course, one of the larger, as we're one of the larger industrial nations, and we have a lot of cars. We have been a big contributor to air quality or lack of quality, pollution, and global warming gases. So that this investment is warranted, and this investment is, I think, going to make a very substantial difference and enhance our opportunity to get to the objectives set forth by Paris by over 175 nations of the world agreed. I think that Donald Trump's withdrawing from the Paris Agreement sent a terrible message to the rest of the world. If the US doesn't care, why should we care? And if we don't all care together, particularly China, India, Russia, the European, and then the developing world also needs help. I've got a bill, JB, called Amazon 21 that deals with one of the issues the president has talked about at COP in Scotland, and that is trying to maintain our carbon sinks, our forests, great forests of the world are carbon sinks. They suck in carbon, and so they clean up the air, and they provide us with oxygen. But the farmer who has 100 acres, you can look at the trees and you say, well, they're very pretty, but he can't support his family, can't send his kids to school. He can't buy equipment by looking at his trees and saying they're very pretty. So we have to give him some incentive to keep those trees in the ground, and governments to keep their forests intact. So I've got a bill that provides $9 billion to the executive department to participate with other governments and the private sector in incentivize keeping those carbon sinks, and they may be bogs, there are others, in place, so that this $500 billion that we're talking about is going to be critical if we're going to not have our children confronted with a climate that will not sustain their economy, the quality of their life, or their health.
Well, thank you for that. I know we're near the bottom of the hour, and we promised to let you go to your important day job, Majority Leader. But one last question. Obviously, you have a lot of business leaders on the call here. As you mentioned, all were very supportive of the bipartisan effort around infrastructure. What can groups like this do? How can the business leaders help over the next 60 to 90 days to make sure that we continue to move forward faster on the legislative priorities that need to get done?
Well, first of all, I think Build Back Better, which we just discussed, is also a critically important component. Let me just one example. Childcare. I have 3 daughters. Now their children are all old enough, but I've got a granddaughter who has my 4 great-grandchildren. She has the good fortune of being able to stay home with those kids. But my daughters were not so fortunate. When they were working, they first of all, their husbands were a little earlier in their careers, weren't making that much money. They were not making that much money, and getting childcare was, in many cases, financially out of their range. But even more importantly, it was not available at whatever cost. So what we've done in the Build Back Better Act is both for home care, for family medical leave, so people can take care of sick children or a sick spouse or something like that, and childcare providers. And it also deals with education, trying to facilitate young people and not so young people getting continuing education and education. The theory the president had was we got to rescue, get us back from the precipice of disaster caused by the pandemic, invest in our infrastructure. So in the 21st century, we'll have the kind of infrastructure. We know China is putting a lot of money into its infrastructure, much more than we are per capita and by result. And then provide for the ability of people to live decent quality lives and participate in employment and building our economy. So I think the business community, JB, has a tremendous stake in all 3 of these pieces of legislation. And what I would urge them all to do, which is what I have been urging them to do, is focus on the executives at the state, local, municipal, county, municipal levels that will be spending this money, and bird dogging it so from their perspective, it does in fact enhance the objectives that we want to get. And that is grow our economy, better quality of life and meet the climate challenge that we have. And I think in their everyday business, they will see, whether it's a small business, a medium business, or a very large business, they will see the challenges they have and what they need government partnership. You call yourselves the partnership. And the partnership, as we know, but not everybody knows, may think it's just a partnership of the businesses. What it is a partnership of business and government working together towards a common agenda to, grow our economy, grow jobs, grow quality of life for our people.
Well, that's great. Well, I'd add to that all of our friends in labor who have been instrumental in helping move all of these items along, both for the partnership and, of course, more broadly as
You
well.
politicians, of course, want to mention labor, and I'm sorry that I didn't.
Little role reversal. We'll get folks confused on the call.
There you go. But the fact, you are so right. I mean, the labor and business, chambers of commerce, organized labor, they came together on this infrastructure, and boy, they really made a difference because they knew they have a common objective, and that is to grow our economy, create good paying jobs. And by the way, we provided, as you know, we want these jobs to be good paying jobs. And when I talk about energy is going to, the alternative sources of energy initiatives, they're going to create a lot of well-paying jobs. And just as the tech explosion created millions and millions of very good paying jobs, I think the same thing's going to happen here.
Yeah.
JB, let me again thank you and your partners. When we're all partners together in this. And to the extent that we work more closely together and think together, then our conclusions are going to be better and our results will be better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the time, Majority Leader. We're excited about all the opportunity ahead.